بسم الله الرحمن الرحيم
بسم الله الرحمن الرحيم الحمد لله رب العالمين والصلاة والسلام على رسول الله وعلى آله وصحبه أجمعين اللهم لا سهل إلا ما جعلته سهلا وأنت تجعل الحزن إذا شئت سهلا اللهم اشرح لي صدري ويسر لي أمري واحلل عقدة من لساني يفقه قولي. Assalamu alaikum wa rahmatullahi wa barakatuh. So inshallah today, as Sheikh Asim kind of touched on before, we want to cover the idea or the concept of revival. And before getting into the depths of the idea of revival, I want to first make it clear that linguistically you understand the word revival means to bring something back to life or to make something relevant or important again. And from this perspective, we see that the deen, when we say that we want to have revival of the deen, it means we want to bring the deen back as a practical implementation in society. In the Quran, Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala says, بعد أعوذ بالله من الشيطان الرجيم بسم الله الرحمن الرحيم هو الذي أرسل رسوله بالهدى ودين الحق ليظهره على الدين كله. So he is the one, Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, who sent this Rasulahu, the Rasul sallallahu bilhuda wa deen al-haq, with guidance and the deen of truth, liyudhhirahu ala ad-deen kullih, to make it clear, to make it open, and make it prevail over all other adyan, all other ways of life, all other methods of living. So from this perspective is what we kind of want to approach the topic from, of revival, that we want to bring back this practical implementation of Islam as a societal perspective, from a societal perspective. And one question that we kind of have to understand as well is that why is this so important? So we're what, 12 days and 13 nights almost into Ramadan. And why is it that we're sitting here speaking about the topic of revival when we could have chosen, for example, the topic of perfection of salah? We could have chosen the topic of the etiquette of dua. We could have chosen many other very, very important topics. But again, we chose this topic of revival for a reason. And the reason is that we see, looking across the Muslim world right now, the blood of Muslims is cheap. It is very cheap. We see, especially in Gaza right now, Muslims are being starved, killed in different numerous ways, and it's as if the kuffar are playing with the lives of Muslims and they're taking it as a game, seeing how many they can kill. So from this perspective, Muslim blood being cheap is due to this lack of implementation of Islam. If Islam was here as a system, as a way of life, there would be an army that would defend these Muslims. There would be an army that wouldn't have a question, it wouldn't even be a question whether it would move or not. We wouldn't have to have a Sharia council come together and say, oh, the hukm shari'i is that the armies need to move, and the armies don't move. So from this perspective, that is why we're approaching this topic. And not even just that, because we understand this topic of Muslim blood being cheap and how the Muslims are, not just in Gaza, in Yemen, in Syria, etc., in Iraq, Muslim blood is being shed. But also, when you have a society that is ruled by other than Islam, it promotes haram, it makes the halal very, very hard to practice. And this is very, very important, because sometimes we miss this point that this is completely and essentially linked to our iman. Our iman in Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. Our reaction to the haram in society is linked to our iman. Because if we see the haram and we don't feel anything, if we see the haram, we don't feel anything, we don't feel any hatred towards it or any disgust towards it or any rejecting from inside towards it, then this is a huge issue. And when I was reading in Ibn Rajab al-Hanbali's Jami' al-Ulum al-Hikam, when he was describing the hadith of Man ra'a minkum munkaran falyughayyirhu biyadihi, that hadith, he explains the one where they enjoin the good for being the evil. If one of you sees an evil, let him change it with his hand. If he can't, then with his tongue. If he can't, then with his heart. And that is because of Iman. So in the description, or when he's commenting on the hadith, he narrates multiple versions of the same hadith, and then he says, فدلت هذه الأحاديث كلها على وجوب إنكار المنكر بحسب القدرة عليه. So these ahadith of enjoining the good and forbidding the evil, they have showed the obligation of inkar al-munkar, of forbidding the evil, of rejecting the evil, of making clear that this is evil and is haram. بِحَسَبِ قُدْرَةٍ عَلَيْهِ, based off of the ability or the capability that one has on it. وَأَنَّ إِنْكَارَهُ بِالْقَلْبِ لَا بُدَّ مِنْهِ, and the inkar with the qalb, and the hatred or forbidding of the evil with the heart, لَا بُدَّ مِنْهِ, this is absolutely must happen. There is no situation where this cannot happen. فَمَنْ لَمْ يُنْكِرْ قَلْبُهُ الْمُنْكَرْ دَلَّ عَلَى ذَهَابِ الْإِيمَانِ مِنْ قَلْبِهِ. In this is a statement we have to sit and contemplate and understand very clearly. The one who, when he sees the haram, he sees ma'asi Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, he sees zina spread in society, he sees riba, or maybe he even sees Muslims dealing with riba, his heart needs to, from inside, hate that evil. And Ibn Rajab makes it very clear, دَلَّ عَلَى ذَهَابِ الْإِيمَانِ مِنْ قَلْبِهِ. If one does not have this forbidding of the evil or hatred of this munkar, then this shows that iman has left his heart. So this is a very, very important topic to understand, that if we don't enjoy the good and forbid the evil in society, this is a huge, huge, huge obligation on our neck. Right? We understand the hadith says, مَنْ رَأَى مِنْكُمْ مُنْكَرًا فَلْيُغَيِّرْهُ بِيَدِهِ فَإِنْ لَمْ يَسْتَطِعْ فَبِلِسَانِهِ فَإِنْ لَمْ يَسْتَطِعْ فَبِقَلْبِهِ وَذَلِكَ أَضْعَفُ الْإِيمَانِ. We understand that when you see a munkar, you change it with your hand, and if you can't, so link to capability. If one can't change a munkar with his hand, for example, we see that, we look at, for example, riba is being dealt with in society. We can't physically change that with our hand right now, right? None of us have the authority to go and change that with our hand. فَإِن لَمْ يَسْتَطِعْ فَبِلِسَانِهِ. But if you can't change it with your hand, then change it with your tongue. And then it continues on, and if you can't even do that, then hate it in your heart, and that is the weakest of iman. So notice that in every situation, we have to have inkar al-munkar from our heart as minimum. And if we can speak about it, we should speak about it. And if we can remove it with our hand, we should remove it with our hand. And this is something that it's looking at society around us today, there is so much munkar, so much general evil that we see around us, that it really shows us the importance of revival. It shows the importance of having the hukum of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala implemented. Because if we had the hukum of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala implemented, then it would be easy to approach the halal, and it would be harder to approach the haram. How many Muslims do we know or do we see in colleges or universities or even at school or at work who are involved in zina, whatever stage that may be, or are involved in riba? Where is the state to come and tell this Muslim and to grab his hand and tell him you shouldn't do that, or to tell him this is not allowed, or to tell him that if you are going to do this, it's somewhere where the imam can't see you, because if he did see you, he would stop and forbid that evil. So this is an important concept, brothers and sisters, brothers. Now, the next point I want to hit on is the fact that using this state, it would propagate the deen. And the Sahaba had this, subhanAllah, when you look at in the Sahaba in Mecca, they had this ghira for Islam. They had this ghira in the sense that they wanted their deen, and they know their deen is the truth, so they want it to be, Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala's word is supreme. It is the highest above everything else. They couldn't stand watching Rasulullah sallallahu alayhi wasallam being tortured. They couldn't stand Rasulullah sallallahu alayhi wasallam being spat on, being ridiculed, all this kind of stuff. The propaganda against him, they couldn't stand it. And you see, all of them in their own capacity did everything they could to raise up this deen and raise up the word of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. They hated to see Islam and Muslims weak. They hated to see Islam and Muslims persecuted and disgraced in the land. And again, this is something that we see today very clearly in all parts of the world. Islam and Muslims are humiliated. Islam and Muslims are persecuted all over the world. So this idea of revival, this is the perspective we want to approach, that we are coming to solve this issue. Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala says in the Quran, وَمَا أَرْسَلْنَاكَ إِلَّا رَحْمَةً لِلْعَالَمِينَ. We have not sent you, Rasulullah sallallahu alayhi wa sallam, illa rahmatan lil alameen, except as a mercy lil alameen, to all of mankind. So we are coming with a solution for not just the Muslims, with a solution for not just raising the word of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, but also raising the lives of non-Muslims as well. And sometimes we see at university, we'll have a booth for Gaza, and we'll be talking about Gaza and explain to people about Gaza and the Islamic perspective on Gaza. And sometimes we even have non-Muslims. A non-Muslim will come up to you and say, because they'll see the videos on whether it's Instagram or Facebook or whatever, they'll see the videos on social media of Muslims being tortured, and they're still saying Alhamdulillah. They're still saying praise be to Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. And this is something, for us, we see it as normal. We see it as this is like strong iman, this is what a Muslim is supposed to do. But for them, this is something that is mind-boggling. It is something that they have a hard time comprehending. How can a Muslim sit there and say Alhamdulillah, praise be to Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, when everything in their life is crumbling, when their family members are being killed, when everything is going bad, they're still saying praise be to Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. So they'll come and ask, like, I have everything I could ever want and ever need in this life. Everything. Yet I'm still not happy. Why are they not happy? It's a question they can't answer. From our perspective, we know the answer, because you haven't fulfilled the purpose of your life. And this is what this Rahmatan lil Alameen is. This is why we talk about revival and bringing back Islam on a political landscape perspective. It's to push this da'wah of Islam to people across the globe as a Rahmatan lil Alameen. And now this necessitates, brothers, that we have to do more than dua. And the reason why I single out this specific topic is because a lot of times we see that Muslims will ask questions that, okay, why are the dua of the ummah not being answered? How many Ramadans in a row have we made dua collectively as a ummah? Collectively. Made dua for victory, whether that's in Palestine or etc. And the victory hasn't come. Now, there's a hadith of Rasulullah sallallahu alayhi wa sallam that we have to listen to it and take it very seriously and memorize it. وَالَّذِي نَفْسِي بِيَدِهِ لَتَأْمُرُنَّ بِالْمَعْرُوفِ وَلَتَنْهَوْنَ عَنِ الْمُنْكَرِ أَوْ لَيُشْرِكَنَّ اللَّهَ أَنْ يَبْعَثَ عَلَيْكُمْ عِقَابًا مِّنْهُ ثُمَّ تَدْعُونَهُ فَلَا يُسْتَجَابَ لَكُمْ. Rasulullah sallallahu alayhi wa sallam said, he's swearing, وَالَّذِي نَفْسِي بِيَدِهِ, verily by the one in whose hand is my soul. Rasulullah sallallahu alayhi wa sallam is swearing by Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. لَتَأْمُرُنَّ بِالْمَعْرُوفِ, he is commanding us to enjoy good. وَلَتَنْهَوْنَ عَنِ الْمُنْكَرِ, and you must forbid evil. And after that, if you don't, or Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala will certainly soon send His punishment to you. ثُمَّ تَدْعُونَهُ فَلَا يُسْتَجَابَ لَكُمْ. And then, you collectively, تَدْعُونَهُ, the ummah, will make dua to Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, and our dua will not be answered. فَلَا يُسْتَجَابَ لَكُمْ. So this is something that's very, very important. But this is very important, that if we are going to make dua, we have to couple our dua with action. We have to couple our dua with understanding this concept of revival. That this idea of revival is not something that we talk about and then we don't do. Or we say, it would be nice to have Islam implemented, but we don't do anything for it. It would be nice to see the Muslims victorious, to see the Muslims not being slaughtered, but we don't do anything for it. So it's something we have to take very seriously and look for practical steps to understanding this method of revival. And inshallah, without getting too deep into the method or ways, right? Like Sheikh Hassan said before, this idea of revival, if you have questions about it, ask people around you who are knowledgeable in this topic. But the point I want to give in this talk here is the fact that this path of revival is not going to be an easy one. It's not going to be an easy one, and it's a path that we've seen others before us take that path. For example, Sayyid Qutb, rahmatullah alayh, or Anwar al-Awlaqi, rahmatullah alayh. These were all scholars who took this path, who took this path and decided that, you know what, I see a problem in the ummah, I see the Muslims being humiliated, I see the Muslims being killed, I see the Muslims going through a genocide. I want to stand in front of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala on the Day of Judgment and have something to present. Something to present and say that, Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, I did whatever I could. Please accept whatever little I could do. And we see that it's something that not only were they killed for, but they were imprisoned, etc., but it's something that's very, very, very hard. And to look at, for example, Sayyid Qutb, when he was asked to write a letter seeking pardon for Abd al-Nasir, he said, verily, the index finger that testifies to the oneness of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala in prayer, in salah, utterly rejects to write even a letter endorsing the rule of the taghut, of a tyrant. So Abd al-Nasir said, write a letter saying, oh, you apologize and etc., and you shouldn't have said 1, 2, 3, and we'll pardon you from your jail time, or we'll pardon you from your sentence. And look at the response of Sayyid Qutb. He knows that he's walking towards death. He is bringing himself one step closer to death, right? But look at the istiqamah. Look at the steadfastness of Sayyid Qutb rahimahullah. And then he says, why should I seek his pardon? Why should I seek Abd al-Nasir's pardon? If I have been imprisoned rightfully, then I accept the right judgment. And if I have been imprisoned falsely, then I am greater than having to seek pardon from falsehood. So look at the clear line that Sayyid Qutb rahimahullah is drawing between haqq and batil, is drawing between truth and falsehood. He is making very clear and making himself as an example. This is an example for us to contemplate on and look what motivates someone to go so far that even in the last moments of his life, he is standing on this path of istiqamah very clearly. He is standing steadfast. And to mention some ahadith on this topic, so we understand the perspective a Muslim should have on this topic. Rasulullah sallallahu alayhi wa sallam says, "Inna a'zam al-jihad kalimatu haqqin 'inda sultanin ja'ir." Rasulullah sallallahu alayhi wa sallam says that the greatest form of jihad is a word of haqq, a word of truth, 'inda sultanin ja'ir, in front of an imam or a ruler or a sultan, someone of authority who is ja'ir, who is oppressive, who is a tyrant. And moreover, Rasulullah sallallahu alayhi wa sallam says, "Sayyidu shuhada'i Hamza ibn Abd al-Muttalib, wa rajulun qama ila imamin ja'ir, fa'amarahu, wa nahahu, faqatalah." Sayyidu shuhada, the leader of shuhada is Hamza ibn Abd al-Muttalib, radiyallahu anhu. Wa rajulun qama ila imamin ja'ir, and a man who stood up to an imam, to a ruler who is ja'ir, again, who is also oppressive, who is a tyrant. Fa'amarahu, so he commanded him to enjoin good. وَنَهَاهُ, and he commanded him to forbid evil. فَقَتَلَ, so this ruler killed him. So look at these two virtues that Rasulullah sallallahu alayhi wa sallam is laying down for us, that what's waiting for us on this path. Very clearly saying that when we stand up for haqq, when we stand up to clearly draw the straight line next to the crooked one, there is a light at the end of the tunnel. With your sacrifice in this dunya, there is huge reward in the akhirah. And to understand also one more thing, these non-Muslims, these kuffar who are plotting against the Muslims, they're not oblivious to what the Muslims are doing. They're not oblivious to the way Muslims think. They're not oblivious to our deen. And to just give a short example of this, a Rand report, so Rand is a think tank. A Rand report from September last year categorizing the radicalness and the threat level of different Muslim groups mentions, how can the United States respond to the challenges and opportunities that current conditions in the Muslim world pose to U.S. interests? We suggest, so the person writing this Rand report, we suggest a number of social, political, and military options. So these non-Muslims are writing a report, a think tank is writing a report explaining this is how to deal with Muslims. And to just pull out one small section for us. The section under promote moderate network creation. And moderate here is talking about moderate Muslims. So again, they have an entire report, and this is hundreds of pages. If I remember correctly, it was 550 pages. 550. Like the Quran, 600 pages. They wrote 550 pages on how to deal with Muslims. Again, categorizing them from radical to this one's more liberal leaning, or this one's more moderate, and this one's a threat, this one's not a threat, and this one, he's a threat to actually the deen itself, so you have to go for a moderate Muslim. This stuff is in there. To pull out one quote. The radicals are a minority. The radicals are a minority, but in many areas, they hold the advantage because they have developed extensive networks spanning the Muslim world and sometimes reaching beyond it. Liberal and moderate Muslims, although a majority is almost all countries, have not created similar networks. Their voices are often fractured or silenced. The battle for Islam will require the creation of liberal groups. The battle for Islam will require the creation of liberal groups to retrieve Islam from the hijackers of the religion. So just pause right there. To retrieve Islam from the hijackers of the religion. Who are these people to come and tell us that this is what Islam says, this is what Islam doesn't say? But again, why are we reading this? We're reading this to show us we have a full perspective. A Muslim should not be bitten from the same hole twice. A Muslim should learn from the past experiences of his other Muslim brothers. These non-Muslims are not oblivious. They're not oblivious to the deen. They're not oblivious to the way a Muslim thinks. They're not oblivious to these ahadith we read before about the virtues of speaking the haqq, etc. They understand this, and that's why they say liberal and moderate Muslims aren't the ones who are very prominent in the community, but we have to create them. We have to create liberal Muslim groups. Create liberal Muslim groups. And look at, again, weaponizing virtue. Weaponizing virtue, how? They say to retrieve Islam from hijackers of the religion. So these quote-unquote conservative Muslims who want to see Islam be established as a deen, as a full implementation in life, as a state, as a rahmatan lil alamin, like we said before, a mercy for all mankind, these are the hijackers of the religion. Hijackers. And so notice how they weaponize virtue. They say, oh, we're coming to help the people. We're coming to help you. You guys are the ones who are, you're miskeen, you're poor, you don't understand 1, 2, 3, you're not civilized. We're here to teach you. And then it continues on. Creation, to retrieve Islam from the hijackers of the religion, creation of an international network is critical because such a network would provide a platform to amplify the message of moderates and also to provide them with some protection. So again, to amplify the voices of moderate Muslims and to provide them with protection. However, moderates do not have the resources to create this network themselves. The initial impulse may require an external catalyst. So notice this last line. An external catalyst may be required to initiate and push these moderate Muslim groups into be integrated into Muslim society. Because they understand the aqeedah of Islam. They understand that Muslims when they have a strong connection with the aqeedah of Islam, that they don't accept this idea of I'm a liberal Muslim, and then you're a moderate Muslim, and he might be a conservative Muslim, and he's just a radical Muslim. We understand that Islam has come with ahkam that we follow. Like Shaykh Hassan said before, there's a fard kifaya. A fard kifaya on our neck is not something that we say, oh, this fard kifaya is for the radical Muslims. This is for the conservative Muslims. Not for liberal and moderate Muslims, we focus on other things. So they understand that this idea is not palatable to Muslims. So they say we have to have an external catalyst. So they'll even put in resources and put more resources to have a catalyst, to push this into the Muslim community and have it grow in there. And have it grow in the Muslim community. So, brothers, if this doesn't show us the need for revival, I don't know what will. When we are clearly seeing non-Muslims in this country and abroad are plotting against Muslims, they're planning, they're doing as much as they can to come up with the most elaborate and well thought out plan to keep the Muslims unrevived. So if this is not evidence for us to take the moment to stand up and say, I'm going to take this path of revival. I'm going to decide to take the path of istiqamah. I'm going to decide to be steadfast on the deen of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, and I'm going to stand up for the truth, and I'm going to speak the truth, and I will work towards the truth. And to challenge these things we might face in society when it comes to non-Muslims planning or the odds being against us. We have to have a strong mindset. And to derive how to get this strong mindset, we have to look at the Sahaba of Rasulullah sallallahu alaihi wasallam, because they went through this. What we're going through is not anything new from this aspect. That maybe the styles are different, but it's the same situation. The Muslims are in a society. In Mecca, they were in a society where they were persecuted. Quraysh did plot and plan against them. Quraysh did come up with elaborate plans to keep the Muslims unrevived. And we see the Sahaba, alayhim, they would take all the steps they could, obviously following Rasulullah sallallahu alayhi wasallam, to stand up for this deen. And just to highlight some of the mentality that some of the Sahaba would have, right? If you look at Abdullah ibn Mas'ud radiyallahu anhu, a man with no tribe to back him, right? And if you open up Sirat ibn Hisham, it says he's awwal man jahal al-Quran. He was the first person who jahal al-Quran, that he openly proclaimed or read the Quran after Rasulullah sallallahu alayhi wasallam. So we see that he went out, and before he went out, the Sahaba told him, Abdullah Mas'ud, you're going out with no tribe to back you. You're going out with no guarantee that you'll survive. And notice, Abdullah Mas'ud still went, and he recited the Quran, and he was beaten for it. And when he came back, he said, I'll go the next day. I don't mind. I want to go. So notice the level of sacrifice that a Muslim has. Why? Because he adopts the Aqidah of Islam. And I'll get into Aqidah of Islam very quickly before I run out of time. To give an example, there's a saying I heard from a sheikh a couple days ago. نحن قوم تحمينا آجالنا. That we are a people who tahmina, our protectors, our shield, you can say, for example, is ajaluna, is our lifespan. So imagine you have in front of your shield your lifespan. You're thinking, like, how does that make sense? How is my lifespan protecting me? Isn't my lifespan that when it runs out, I'm dead? I pass away? The perspective is that when you go out and you stand up in front of a tyrant and you say a word of truth that you know, for example, you might be killed for it. Or when you're in jihad, for example, and you're in war and you're fighting and you might get scared. نحن قوم تحمينا آجالنا. A sword cannot kill you. This is the circumstances of death. Poison can't kill you. This is a circumstance of death, but not the consequence of death. If a sword or poison or a bullet to the head were consequences of death, then you would see that everyone who is shot in the head, everyone who gets poisoned, everyone who gets a sword to a critical point, a critical limb, they will be dead. But this is not the consequence. This is not the trigger that 100% if this occurs, if then statement. If this occurs, then this will happen. This is not true. Only Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, when He decides that your time is up, your lifespan has hit, your ajal is done, then you'll pass away. There are circumstances, but these are not the consequences. And to look at one ayah of the Quran, to mention, to bring to us this feeling that we are not alone. Us humans are not even alone. In Badr, Rasulullah sallallahu alaihi wasallam was ill-equipped. He was outnumbered. The odds were stacked against him, but you see that Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala sent down malaika. He sent down, subhanahu wa ta'ala, angels to aid the Muslims because they're standing on haqq. And we can also receive the aid of angels. Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala says in the Quran, إن الذين قالوا ربنا الله ثم استقاموا تتنزل عليهم الملائكة ألا تخافوا ولا تحزنوا وأبشروا بالجنة التي كنتم توعدون. Verily, إن الذين قالوا ربنا الله ثم استقاموا. Verily, the ones who say our Lord is Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala ثم استقاموا, and they decide to take this path, this road of steadfastness. ثم استقاموا فلا خوف تتنزل عليهم الملائكة. The malaika, the angels, will be sent down upon them. For what? ألا تخافوا ولا تحزنوا. So that you do not fear and you do not grieve. وأبشروا بالجنة. And have glad tidings of Jannah. التي كنتم توعدون. The one that you were promised. So staying steadfast on this path, no matter how how much temptations we see that this is too hard, or it's getting too much of a struggle, we see that there's a reward behind that struggle. And to end off with this, we see that there's 3 concepts that we have to very deeply understand, and we don't have time to get into it today, inshallah in a later lecture. But 3 concepts within the Aqidah of Islam that if these are sound in our minds, then we will 100% turn to something that it's someone who does not fear anyone other than Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. لا يخافون لومة لائم. They do not fear the blame of a blamer. This is number 1. Rizq is in the hands of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. Rizq, provision, is in the hands of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. Number 2, like we said before, ajal, lifespan, is in the hands of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. And benefit and harm is in the hands of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. And the reason why I chose these 3 things, or focus on these 3 things, is because when we understand that these all are only, and notice, only in the hands of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, that your paycheck that you get from your employer, this is not your rizq. You, for example, hiding in your house or staying away from conflict is not gonna extend your lifespan. You exercising or eating healthy, etc., is not gonna extend your lifespan. This is only from tawfiq from Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. And then benefit and harm. Everything that we benefit from, anything that we're harmed from in this life, this is from Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. When we understand these 3 concepts, then this path becomes very clear. Becomes very, very, very clear. And the reason why I mention it again is because, for example, we have ulama these days who they can recite to you the mutun of aqidah. They can recite to you different, they can recite to you aqidah tahawiyya, they can recite to you this aqidah, that aqidah. They know, they've studied the books of aqidah very clearly. And they know it better than all of us. They know it very well. And to give a better example, they know it better than the people of Gaza. They know these mutun very clearly, and they understood it, and they studied it, and they teach it. Yet you see that the same scholars are too scared to even stand up and say a word of truth. A word of truth. The same ones who understand Aqidah of Islam, who understand that them saying this word of truth is only virtue in the next life, and it will not harm them in the slightest. Their rizq is already written for them. Ajal is already written for them. Benefit and harm will come to them no matter what. So theoretically, we understand these concepts, but do we practically understand these concepts? When we are faced with situations where we are given a choice between saying the truth or hiding, between standing and being steadfast, having istiqamah, or shying away, do we take the path of istiqamah? Do we take the path to say the word of truth? If we don't, then we have to go back and review our aqidah. Review and recheck. Do we really believe in La ilaha illallah Muhammadur Rasulullah? So with that, brothers and sisters, inshallah, I really take seriously this idea of revival and this idea of bringing back Islam as a practical way of like just look at, for example, these couple concepts that we mentioned at the end here about rizq and ajal and benefit and harm and being in the hands of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. This is stuff that if Muslims learned from when they were young, imagine you have an education system, an entire education system that is teaching Muslims from when they are young on these concepts and raising them on these concepts. Imagine. So we ask Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala to help us on this path. We ask Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala to make us from those who work for His deen. وآخر دعوانا الحمد لله رب العالمين وجزاكم الله خيرا والسلام عليكم ورحمة الله وبركاته.